4th. It was a day to celebrate, and it ends up being the end of the life of Nolan Wells. And for all involved, it's a tragedy, but for the family, it is absolutely brutal. But the question is this a criminal cover-up? Is this an accident? And at the end of the day, when we get some results from this investigation, will the public trust it? I'm Vinnie Politan. Let's investigate.
The boys say Nolan planned to stay on the island. The girl says he told her he was leaving with his friends. Two different stories, and somewhere off Horn Island, an 18-year-old star athlete ended up dead, drowned, vanished, or left behind. The autopsy isn't finished, but the contradictions already are. Here's what's known. On July 4th, 2026, 18-year-old Nolan Wells boarded a boat with friends for a holiday trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. He never came home. 2 days later, his body was recovered from the shoreline, turning what should have been a celebration into a death investigation, with questions multiplying almost immediately. Nolan wasn't reckless. He was a strong swimmer and a standout athlete, someone who could handle himself in the water. But his family isn't focused on the water. They're focused on what happened before it. His phone, his keys, the timeline, and the way the investigation initially seemed to be heading toward a conclusion the evidence didn't support.
So the public is invested in this story. The public wants to know what finds out. But at the end of the day, this is a story about a family, and a family dealing with a very difficult tragedy. The loss of a young man, way too early. Shouldn't have happened, but it did. And now for this family, obviously they want some answers. And it's not crystal clear yet. It's far from crystal clear. What we do know is that Nolan was out that day. He was out with friends. He wasn't, surrounded by strangers. These were his friends. So that makes you first think, if something nefarious happened, why would his friends be involved in it? Well, you think about the age of everyone, and if you're drinking and doing other things, things happen. And sometimes something bad happens. Maybe it's on purpose, maybe it's not. But then there's a cover-up, and it makes it even worse for everyone. That's if these friends are involved with what happened to Nolan Wells here. And one reason a lot of people are concerned is the issue of the cell phone. Nolan Wells, the story, hey, voluntarily, I'll stay on the island. I'll stay on the island without my cell phone? Why would you do that? Unless something else happened and the cell phone was sort of an afterthought. I mean, that issue needs to be cleared up because it's a big deal, plus all the communications on the cell phone as well. So that's really, to me, one of the keys to unlocking what happened here.
The family hired attorney Ben Crump, a name that instantly elevates any case into national conversation. Crump doesn't take quiet cases. He takes cases where the system appears to have failed, especially where race and accountability intersect. At the first press conference, his message was direct. The explanation given so far does not make sense.
That when I received the word of what happened to Nolan and began hearing what was pieced together, it is clear that this situation must have the most thorough and objective investigation to lead to justice. What we've been told does not make sense. And being that there is lack of confidence in the local authorities, who have already, in my judgment, seemed to have mishandled where it was going, because to just immediately, before a week time, saying there was nothing done wrong, when we hear that this young man was engaged in some kind of argument that was on tape, that his cell phone and keys ended up with one of the people that were there on the island and got away. he was one black with three young white men who happened to end up with his phone, happened to end up with his keys, then there's just too many questions that they should not be closing the investigation.
And so I'm going to get to that in a moment, these glaring contradictions, but to try to say, oh, we're suggesting it was just an accident or drowning, go ahead and move on. Well, they are not accepting it. They are not accepting it. They want to know that you have not taken the path of least resistance, that you have done a full, complete, thorough, impartial investigation, because it cannot be lost on anybody, but especially us in the black community. If the roles were reversed and you had three young black men on a boat with a young white man, and that young white man ended up dead, what kind of investigation would be being conducted by the Mississippi law enforcement officials? How many times would those three young black men be interrogated? So all we're asking is the same consideration you would have given if the roles were reversed. Give that consideration to this family as well.
He criticized what he called a rush by local authorities to declare early on that nothing wrong had happened before the investigation, autopsy, or phone examination were even complete. That premature framing, that this was simply a tragic drowning, the kind of accident that happens when young people drink near water, is exactly what the family refused to accept. Nolan's mother, Christine, spoke through visible grief. His father, Elmore, described in detail the night he tracked down his son's belongings, a story worth hearing in full. Friday, July 3rd. Nolan leaves home to spend the night with friends. Saturday, July 4th. The group boats out to Horn Island. That same afternoon, the group returns to the mainland without Nolan. That last point is the crux of everything.
Family first to trust the results. If the family trusts the results, there's a much greater chance that the public will trust them as well. So I want to walk through a timeline right now, because I think to get the big picture of what happened over the course of those 2 days, ending with the tragic death of Nolan Wells. Friday, July 3rd, we begin. Nolan Wells left his family to spend the night with friends ahead of the holiday weekend. All right, so that's I'm going with friends. Like I said, this is important. He's with friends. He's not with enemies. He's with people he knows, people he trusts, people that like him. Then on Saturday, July 4th, Nolan Wells joined friends for a boat trip to Horn Island. That afternoon, the group returned to the mainland, but without Nolan. Without Nolan. Okay, that's unusual, right? A group goes out and then a group comes back -1. Family members reported Nolan missing that night after getting a call from one of their friends around 11 p.m. So to me, that timeline's important. Like, you return without your friend, okay, but why are you returning without your friend? And at what point do you get concerned that your friend's nowhere to be seen? And if you leave him on an island, how is he supposed to get back? What was the plan there? What was the plan? There has to be an overall plan. You don't just like get off a boat on a small little island and say, okay, swim back. That's not the way it works. So to me, those are some of the questions I have. And what is it at 11 p.m.? What happens that makes a friend say, okay, I need to call his parents because there's a problem here. There's a problem here. Why the worry all of a sudden at that moment, at that time? Now, on Sunday, July 5th, his parents get possession of his cell phone after tracking it to a house on land. Whoa, put the brakes on that for a second. Why did they have to track down the cell phone? Why? Like, did someone didn't know that they had his cell phone? Like, how did that work? How did they end up with the cell phone? Why did they have it? Why did they not know that they had it all along? Why did it have to be tracked down by the parents? Also on the 5th, Jackson County Sheriff's Department announced they were coordinating with the United States Coast Guard and Mississippi's Department of Marine Resources to search the island. And this is where things ramped up, right? We've got a missing person. We need to find this young man. And then on Monday, July 6th, that's when he's recovered from the water near the shoreline. But what exactly happened? How did he end up there? What caused his death? When did he die?
A group went out together and came back without one member, and the explanation offered was that Nolan chose to stay behind. But the accounts don't match. The friends claim Nolan stayed to talk to a young woman he'd met on the island. That same young woman says Nolan told her he was leaving with the boys. Someone isn't telling the truth, and the physical evidence points toward an answer. Nolan's phone ended up on land, in the possession of one of the friends. So did his keys. If Nolan truly stayed on the island with his friends, why weren't his phone and keys with him? A family friend used Snapchat's location sharing feature to track the device and found it not on the island, not in the water, but inside a house on land, with one of the boys who'd been on the boat.
We are grateful, especially to our friend Tashima, who actually was one of the people who helped us that night. She went and picked up his cell phone from where it was and then provided that to us, because we of course contacted authorities to figure out who to do the report with, whether it was the county or the city, which then turned into DMR, who I contacted immediately from there. But
Tell them how you got the cell phone.
so our friend actually, when I called her, Nolan is best friends with her two sons, Jalen and Javon. When I called her, I said, Tashima, have you seen Nolan? He's missing. No one has seen him. No one has talked to him. The boys were actually with her sons. So they opened up their Snapchat, because a lot of the kids do have their locations where they're tracking one another. So one of the boys says, well, it's showing that I can't exactly remember what his location was showing, but my Life 360 location was showing something completely different. It was actually showing that his phone was like he was on land. And so we ended up, she received the phone from that parent, and then we met up where his car was, which was at a separate location. There were issues obtaining the key, but even so, there was just a lot of...
Tell them about what happened with the key.
So I'm going to let my husband tell you about that, because he actually went up to the door to get the key, because at that point, I was just not in my right mind. This has just been an awful situation, just terrible.
It's a strange detail. Nobody voluntarily strands themselves on a remote island without any way to call for help, unless something changed. Unless the phone wasn't left behind by choice, but taken. The story of the keys is even more damning. Elmore Wells described going to the house where the group had gathered afterward. Tensions were already high. He asked one of the young men for his son's keys. The young man said he couldn't find them, adding, "Nolan's like my brother." Elmore's reply, "If that's true, go find them." Several minutes passed with no keys. Elmore moved everyone outside to defuse the situation. Then one of the young men got a phone call from a girl who'd been at the house earlier. She said the keys were sitting on top of the Xbox inside. He went back in. 5 minutes later, the keys appeared. Elmore stood outside his son's car holding keys that, moments earlier, someone claimed didn't exist. That's when, in his words, the story started to crack. "So now I feel like you done lied to me. So now I'm really like in distress with you." He didn't raise his voice. He just described what happened, and it spoke for itself. Adding to the confusion, a video began circulating online appearing to show an altercation on the island. Raised voices, something beyond a normal holiday outing. One of Nolan's friends, Trey Shepard, told ABC News that the yelling in the video was his own, not Nolan's. "That's the video I'm referring to, and that's me yelling in the video. It's not Nolan."
Tough spot. You can see they're broken up. It's amazing they can even speak, mom and dad. But a lot of unanswered questions, especially early on. That's why it's important that investigators and the DA keep them in the loop throughout the entire investigation, because that's what they're asking for. They don't know what happened here, but some things are not making sense to them, and they want it to make sense. And they deserve that. They deserve those answers to figure out. But the conflict there is huge. Two people saying two different things about whether or not he was coming back or was staying on the island. Now, they also mentioned this video, and there was a video that was floating around on the internet, and everyone's wondering, is it Nolan on the video? And there's supposed to be an altercation that is heard. But ABC News got Trayston Shepard, who's a friend of Nolan Wells, who said, that's the video I'm referring to, and that's me yelling in the video. It's not Nolan, it is me yelling in the video. So, is he telling the truth? You hope he is. You hope the friend of Nolan Wells is telling the truth. He's going to know if he's yelling. He's going to know if that's him in the video yelling, because it's far away. You don't see the faces necessarily as clearly as you want to. But a lot of people were talking about that video, that there was some sort of a conflict.
That may be accurate, but Elmore added that Nolan had, in fact, been in some kind of recorded argument, and that his phone and keys ended up with one of the friends who had been on the island with him. Not a stranger, a friend. Why do the friends' stories keep shifting? Why don't the timelines line up? And why did it seem like the investigation was being steered toward a conclusion before all the facts were gathered? The district attorney's office has since met with the family and their legal team and agreed to send the case to a grand jury once the investigation concludes. A grand jury doesn't determine guilt. It's a panel of citizens deciding whether there's enough evidence to justify formal charges, functioning as a check on prosecutorial power rather than a final verdict.
There will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information and finished their investigation. We also agreed that we will have a mutual inspection of the cell phone with our experts and their experts, so everybody will be able to see at the same time what the cell phone has.
That's from WLOX, and that's important. Like, it's going to a grand jury. Now, there are investigatory grand juries that take a look at cases, and sometimes they will bring charges, other times they won't. But they are the ones who will take a look at the evidence. And a lot of times what happens in a case like this is you put it in front of a grand jury because it's a hot button case, right? And you're like, listen, we want to make sure that there's no appearance of anyone putting their thumbs on the scale one way or the other. So we put it in front of citizens. We put it in front of a grand jury and let them decide what the evidence tells them. And that's an important step. And you'll see that many times in cases like this that are very volatile and potentially problematic for investigators and for the families, and to get to the truth. So you put it in front of a grand jury. So that's good to hear. The cell phone, the mutual, this is unusual, right? That a cell phone will be looked at from the experts, from, the government, from the state, from prosecutors, as the family's own experts are looking at it. So that's extremely unusual, but a good step towards transparency.
The family has also secured an unusual concession. Their own experts will be allowed to examine Nolan's cell phone side by side with the state's experts, a signal that authorities are treating the family's trust as something worth protecting. To summarize the DA's commitments, a grand jury will review the case once the investigation wraps. The family's experts get equal access to the phone evidence, and the investigation continues until all facts are gathered. Still, the core questions remain open. Was alcohol involved? Did Nolan get caught in a rip current? Or did something criminal take place on that trip? Nobody knows yet. The autopsy isn't finished, and until it is, every contradiction remains unresolved. For anyone who might face a similar situation, a loved one dying under unclear circumstances, there are a few takeaways. Don't rely solely on law enforcement to gather evidence. Their priorities and yours may not align. Bring in your own experts. The way this family brought in Ben Crump and secured an independent phone review. And demand transparency publicly. The family's public push for a grand jury is part of why the DA's office responded at all. The underlying message, staying silent after an unexplained death, isn't patience, it's surrender. Accountability doesn't happen automatically. It has to be demanded and watched. This story is far from over. The autopsy, the phone analysis, and the grand jury will all shape what comes next. But the contradictions already on record are hard to ignore. The phone found off the island, the keys that mysteriously appeared after being denied, the girl's account clashing with the friend's, a father who says he was lied to standing outside his son's car. These aren't opinions, they're documented facts, and they're why this case isn't fading quietly. Whether someone lied isn't really in question anymore. What remains to be seen is whether the system holds anyone accountable. The family is watching. The public is watching. The evidence will decide.